In every close-knit town, there exists an unspoken pact of trust, a belief that certain people will always do the right thing. Among them, there is always a figure of honor, a person we look up to without question. In this town, that person was Sheriff Shoop Marshall. A husband, a father, a friend, and the community's protector, Shoop was seen as the very definition of integrity. But what happens when that trust, that unwavering faith, begins to unravel? When the person you once looked to as a hero harbors a darkness too terrible to imagine? The town was like any other, where children played freely in the streets, where parents exchanged friendly waves, and where neighbors shared lives in a way only possible in small communities. Life felt safe here. But beneath that surface, a betrayal was quietly taking root, one that would turn their world upside down.
At first, nothing appeared unusual. He was the town sheriff, a husband, a father. She was a bright young girl, with her future spread out before her. Their paths crossed like many others in this small town, routine encounters that felt harmless. But slowly, conversations that started innocently lingered longer. Shared moments that once felt safe became something much more dangerous. A boundary was crossed, one that could never be undone. How does a community cope when it realizes that its most trusted figure is capable of the unthinkable? They say every crime leaves a trace, no matter how well it's hidden. But what happens when the person tasked with finding that trace is the very one who knows exactly where it leads? Sheriff Shoop Marshall wasn't just another man in uniform. He was the foundation of this town, respected by his colleagues, trusted by his neighbors, and admired by his family. To most, Shoop had mastered the balance of being a devoted lawman, a loving husband, and a caring father. Married to Sharon, with 2 daughters, he lived a life others aspired to. His younger daughter, Ella, idolized him, seeing her father not just as the sheriff, but as a hero. Ella's best friend, Lakeisha Ellis, was almost like family. She had spent her childhood in the Marshall household, inseparable from Ella. Their friendship was so deep that Lakeisha barely knocked before entering Ella's home. And her connection to Shoop was just as strong, woven through years of trust and shared memories. Lakeisha wasn't just a friend of the family. She was the daughter of Officer Carrega Ellis, Shoop's longtime deputy and closest confidant. Their families were entwined, holidays, birthdays, and milestones shared between them. Lakeisha had grown up under the watchful eyes of both Shoop and her father. She had been there for the barbecues, the family vacations, and the quiet Sunday afternoons in the Marshall home. To her, Shoop was Ella's father, a second father figure in her life, a man she trusted without hesitation. But Lakeisha wasn't the little girl Shoop once knew. Now 17, with ambitions of her own, she dreamed of a career in law enforcement, perhaps even joining the FBI. She was stepping into adulthood with confidence and energy, ready to take on the world. But as she grew, something shifted. The dynamic between her and Shoop took a dangerous turn, and what had once seemed innocent was now irrevocably tainted. In the shadows of their quiet town, a betrayal was brewing, one that would leave scars deeper than anyone could have imagined. Secret Service. She had goals, and she knew what she wanted. Their lives, once connected through friendship and family, now stood on the edge of a shift neither of them could see coming. Shoop saw her more frequently now, not just as Ella's best friend, but as someone with whom he crossed paths regularly. She was in his house almost every weekend. They saw each other at family parties and school events, and occasionally Lakeisha stopped by the sheriff's office to meet her father, waiting in the lobby or wandering the halls. She was always around, always present in the background of Shoop's life. And with each passing day, their paths became just a little more entangled. It started like any other day, one that should have slipped into the routine rhythm of life. But some moments have a way of shifting everything, and this one would be no different. Lakeisha Ellis hadn't planned on staying long at the sheriff's station. She had only stopped by to meet her father, Officer Carrega Ellis, hoping for a quick hello and a ride home. It was something she had done countless times before, waiting in the familiar halls, surrounded by the hum of conversations and the occasional ring of phones. It was ordinary, uneventful. But on this particular afternoon, the air felt different. Shoop Marshall spotted her from his office window as she entered the station, her presence catching his eye in a way it never had before. She wasn't the same girl he remembered. The shadow of adolescence had given way to the undeniable form of a young woman. There was a grace in the way she moved now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Shoop told himself it was nothing, just an observation, but the thought lingered longer than it should have. He knew Lakeisha well, too well, in fact. He had watched her grow up, laughed at her childhood antics, and celebrated her achievements alongside his daughter Ella. But today, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, something stirred inside him, a shift he didn't want to acknowledge. He tried to shake it off, tried to remind himself of who she was, who he was. But the more he watched her, the more difficult it became to look away. She wasn't just Lakeisha, the little girl from the backyard birthday parties. She was someone else now, someone he found himself noticing in ways he shouldn't. The moment of recognition unsettled him, like a sudden misstep on familiar ground. Guilt gnawed at the edges of his thoughts, whispering that this was wrong, that he needed to stop. But temptation has a way of creeping in, winding its way through cracks in even the most disciplined mind. And as much as he fought to push it away, it clung to him, persistent and unwelcome. When Lakeisha made her way down the hall toward her father's desk, Shoop stepped out of his office almost instinctively. He knew Correga was out on assignment. He had sent him out earlier himself. There was no one else for Lakeisha to meet, no one else for her to sit with. And in that moment, Shoop saw an opportunity, a way to prolong this encounter, to explore a curiosity he didn't want to admit he felt. "Lakeisha," he called out, his voice casual, almost fatherly. "Your dad's not back yet. Why don't you come wait in my office?" There was nothing in his tone to suggest anything unusual, no reason for Lakeisha to feel uneasy. She smiled easily, trusting him completely. He was, after all, her father's closest friend, someone she had known her entire life. She followed him without hesitation, walking into the office she had seen so many times before. Shoop offered her a seat by the window, watching as she settled in. She glanced around the room, her eyes catching on the artifacts and photographs scattered across the shelves, mementos from years in law enforcement, framed commendations, and keepsakes from old cases. The room, much like the man himself, seemed steeped in experience and authority. Lakeisha admired it all with a kind of wonder, unaware of the thoughts unraveling in Shoop's mind. He tried to act normal, tried to remind himself that this was just another conversation, just another day. But as he sat down across from her, something inside him refused to quiet down. She wasn't just a visitor in his office, she was a young woman sitting within arm's reach, someone who, for the first time in years, made him feel something unexpected. He asked her about school, an easy topic, familiar territory. And Lakeisha, comfortable in his presence, responded eagerly. She spoke about her classes, her friends, and the future she envisioned for herself. "I've been thinking about going into law enforcement," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Maybe the detectives or even the Secret Service. Something that matters." Shoop listened, his attention fully on her now. There was an earnestness in her words, a spark of ambition that reminded him of his own younger days. And in that moment, he saw an opportunity, a chance to offer guidance, to position himself as someone who could help shape her future. The idea came to him unbidden, a way to extend their conversations beyond this office, to make sure these moments between them didn't end here. "You know," Shoop said slowly, "I have some friends in those agencies. I could put in a good word for you, maybe even help you get some hands-on experience." Lakeisha's face lit up at the offer. "Really? You'd do that for me?" He smiled, playing the part of the mentor she believed him to be. Of course, but there's a lot to learn before you get there. It's not an easy path, and you'll need to work hard. If you want, I could help you prepare. There was nothing in his voice that suggested anything other than genuine kindness, and Lakeisha, eager to succeed, accepted the offer without hesitation. She didn't question his motives. Why would she? To her, this was just an older, experienced man offering her guidance, someone she trusted implicitly. Shoop leaned back in his chair, satisfied with how easily the conversation had flowed, how naturally he had planted the seeds for future encounters. He told himself this was harmless, that he was only helping a young woman reach her goals. But deep down, he knew better. He knew that every word he had spoken, every promise he had made, was part of something much more complicated. As Lakeisha sat across from him, excited about the opportunities ahead, Shoop allowed himself a moment to revel in the power he held, the power to shape her dreams, to guide her path, and, if he chose, to take these meetings further than she could ever imagine. In that moment, a road of no return had been crossed, one that could never be undone. Opportunities can feel like lifelines, especially when they come from someone you trust. For Lakeisha, Shoop's offer of mentorship felt like a step toward everything she had dreamed of, a rare chance to get ahead in a competitive field, guided by someone with experience, influence, and connections. But what she couldn't see, what no one saw, was how easily a dream can become a trap in the hands of the wrong person. Shoop's proposal was simple: a few private sessions, just the two of them, focused on preparing Lakeisha for the world of national security. He framed it as career advice, a way to give her the edge she needed to succeed. At first, Lakeisha felt nothing but gratitude. After all, how many young women her age got this kind of attention from someone in a position of power? He assured her that his guidance would set her apart from the crowd, opening doors she hadn't even imagined yet. But Shoop was careful, too careful. With every word, every suggestion, he planted little doubts in Lakeisha's mind. He warned her not to tell too many people about their sessions, claiming they wouldn't understand her ambition. "People might try to hold you back," he said. "They might tell you it's impossible, that you're aiming too high. The fewer people know, the better. It's safer that way." At first it made sense to Lakeisha. She'd heard the doubts from others before. How young women, especially women like her, shouldn't aim too high. Shoop's warning felt protective, even wise. She didn't question it. Why would she? He was only looking out for her, or so she thought. The sessions began innocently enough. Conversations about the challenges of law enforcement, the importance of resilience, and the skills she'd need to thrive in high-pressure environments. They met after school hours, at first in Shoop's office, then later at more private locations, under the pretense of focused training. He always made her feel special, like she was receiving something no one else could offer her. And Lakeisha, eager to impress, gave the sessions her all, believing they were shaping her future. But slowly, the nature of these meetings began to change. What started as professional guidance became something more personal, more intimate. Shoop started asking her about her life outside of school, her fears, her hopes, her relationships. He blurred the line between mentor and confidant, weaving himself deeper into her life without her realizing it. He was patient, calculating. He didn't rush things. He let Lakeisha come to him, allowed her to trust him completely. Every time she opened up, every time she leaned on him for advice, the grip he had on her life tightened. And Lakeisha, caught in the glow of his attention, never saw it for what it was. She believed she was being guided, not manipulated. She believed Shoop was helping her, not grooming her. The sessions began to stretch longer into the evenings. Shoop always had a reason to extend them, an important topic they hadn't covered yet, a critical piece of advice that couldn't wait. Soon they were meeting late into the night. The meetings were framed as necessary, essential steps on her journey toward success. "If you want to make it, he told her. You have to be willing to put in the extra effort. And Lakeisha, driven by ambition and the desire to please him, agreed without hesitation. She told herself these meetings were part of her growth, that the late hours were a small price to pay for everything Shoop was offering her. But with each session, she found herself more attached to him, not just as a mentor, but as someone she trusted deeply, someone she depended on in ways she couldn't explain. Shoop knew exactly what he was doing. He crafted his words carefully, making her believe that their time together was both a privilege and a secret, something they had to protect from those who might misunderstand. Some people won't see this for what it really is, he told her. They'll think it's inappropriate. They'll try to come between us, tell you to quit, make you give up on your dream. But I know how far you can go, Lakeisha. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Lakeisha believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was the sheriff, her father's trusted friend, the man who had known her all her life. If he said their meetings were necessary, they were. If he said the secrecy was for her benefit, she trusted him. And so she kept quiet, telling no one, not her father, not Ella, not her closest friends, about the time she spent with Shoop. The late-night sessions soon became their own little world, a place where Lakeisha felt both vulnerable and powerful. Shoop made her feel like she was becoming someone important, someone capable of great things. And the more time they spent together, the more she relied on him, not just for guidance, but for emotional support. She saw him as a protector, someone who understood her in ways no one else did. But Shoop's mentorship wasn't just about her future. It was about something selfish. He made sure she needed him, not just for her career, but for her sense of self-worth. With every passing week, Lakeisha found herself more drawn to him, more dependent on his approval. She wasn't just learning from him, she was falling under his spell. Then, one evening, the dynamic shifted completely. They were reviewing case files, discussing real-world examples of high-pressure decision-making, when Shoop's hand lingered just a moment too long on her shoulder. Lakeisha didn't pull away. She didn't know she should. It felt like part of the closeness they had built, a natural extension of the bond they shared. And Shoop, sensing her acceptance, took it as permission to go further. The first kiss came without warning, but it didn't feel forced. It felt inevitable, like a step they had been moving toward all along. Lakeisha, caught in the moment, didn't question it. She had grown used to following Shoop's lead, trusting his guidance. If this was part of their connection, then she welcomed it. That night, the bridge between mentor and lover disappeared entirely. What followed was no longer just mentorship. It was a full-fledged affair, hidden behind the same veil of secrecy Shoop had so carefully crafted. Their meetings continued, now infused with a new intensity, a combination of passion and control that left Lakeisha feeling both exhilarated and vulnerable. She was falling deeper, believing that what they shared was real. To Lakeisha, Shoop wasn't just a mentor anymore, he was her guide, her protector, her everything. But Shoop's control over Lakeisha wasn't just emotional, it was absolute. He had woven himself into every aspect of her life, and with every passing day, she depended more on him, trusted him more, and believed that what they had was something worth protecting. As their affair deepened, the walls around them closed tighter, locking Lakeisha into a world she didn't realize was built on manipulation and deceit. There was no turning back now. Shoop had her exactly where he wanted, completely under his control and hopelessly in love. Secrets have a way of changing people, of creeping into the small spaces of life and shifting everything just slightly out of place. At first, the changes are subtle, hardly noticeable. But as time goes on, the weight of those hidden truths begins to show. For Lakeisha, the affair with Shoop had become the center of her world. Where once she had been open, bubbly, and connected to those closest to her, she now began to pull away. Slowly but surely, The Lancashire everyone knew was slipping into the shadows. Calls from friends went unanswered. Hangouts with Tiffany became fewer and further between. Conversations with her father, Carrega, grew shorter by the day. Where once she had shared everything with him, the small victories, the daily frustrations, now she gave him little more than one-word answers and excuses. Carrega could feel the distance growing, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly why. He had always been close to Lakeisha. They had shared a bond that most fathers would envy. But now, every attempt to connect seemed to be met with a wall. She was always busy, always tired, always distracted. He tried to brush it off at first. Teenagers go through phases, he told himself. Maybe it was the stress of school, the pressure of thinking about her future. But the longer it went on, the harder it became to ignore. There was a shift in her demeanour, something that felt out of character. The Lancashire he knew didn't keep secrets from him, but now it felt as if she were carrying something heavy, something she wasn't willing to share. Carrega wasn't the type to let things slide for long. One evening, he found his chance to confront her. She had come home late, her expression distant, as if her mind were somewhere else entirely. He waited until she was in the kitchen, putting her things down before stepping in. "Lakeisha," he said, keeping his tone steady. "We need to talk." Lakeisha looked up, a flicker of guilt crossing her face, before she masked it with a smile. "What's up, Dad?" she asked, her voice casual. But Carrega could hear the tension beneath it. "I've noticed you've been distant lately," Carrega said carefully. "You're not around as much. You're not talking to me like you used to. What's going on?" For a moment, Lakeisha seemed caught off guard, as if she hadn't expected him to notice. But then she smiled again, this time more forced. "It's nothing, Dad. Just school. You know, a lot on my plate." Carrega wasn't convinced. Something was off. And no matter how hard she tried to act normal, he could feel the distance between them growing. He pressed her gently, asking if there was anything she needed to talk about, anything that might be bothering her. But Lakeisha was ready for the questions. She had learned from Shoop how to dodge, how to deflect, how to steer conversations. "I'm fine," she insisted, her voice just a little too cheerful. "Really, Dad, you don't have to worry about me." Carrega wanted to believe her, wanted to take her words at face value. But a knot of unease settled in his gut, one that he couldn't quite shake. Meanwhile, Shoop was carefully managing the changes in his own life. Sharon, his wife, had begun to sense that something was different. After years of marriage, she knew Shoop better than anyone. And lately, there were small things, things that didn't add up. He had always been a man of routine, steady, predictable, reliable. But now, there were moments when he seemed distant, distracted, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. He came home later than usual, offering vague explanations about long shifts or unexpected meetings. And when he was home, there was a restlessness about him, an unease that Sharon hadn't seen before. She asked him about it, of course, small, subtle questions, not wanting to seem accusatory. "Everything okay at work?" she would ask as they sat down for dinner. Or, "You seem a little off lately. Is something bothering you?" Shoop was ready for the questions. He knew how to lie without making it obvious, how to offer just enough truth to satisfy her without giving anything away. "It's just work," he would say, his tone light but not too light. "You know how things get this time of year." And Sharon, though still unsettled, would let it go. For a while at least. But the nagging feeling didn't go away. She noticed the small things, how he checked his phone more often, how he seemed unusually guarded about where he was going or what he was doing. There were nights when he came to bed long after she had fallen asleep, and mornings when he left the house earlier than usual, always with an excuse at the ready. Sharon told herself she was probably overthinking things. Shoop was the sheriff after all. His job came with its fair share of stress and responsibility. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about work. Something had changed. She just couldn't figure out what. The tension in the Marshall household was little at first, barely noticeable, but it grew with each passing day, like a splinter buried beneath the skin, small enough to ignore, but impossible to forget. Shoop was careful, though. Careful to never let the cracks show too much. Careful to keep the walls of his double life intact. He knew how to say the right things, how to offer just enough affection to keep suspicion at bay. To Sharon, he was still the man she had married, just a little more tired, a little more preoccupied. To his daughters, he was still their father, just a bit more distant than usual. But Shoop knew the truth. He knew that the walls were closing in, slowly but surely. And no matter how carefully he managed things, the weight of his secret was beginning to take its toll. Lakeisha, too, was feeling the strain. She missed the simplicity of her old life, missed the ease with which she could talk to her father, missed the carefree laughter she used to share with Ella. But every time she thought about stepping back, about pulling away from Shoop, she felt the invisible chains tighten around her. He had become more than just a mentor, more than just a lover. He had become the center of her world. And even as she felt the distance growing between herself and the people she loved, she told herself it was worth it. Shoop had promised her a future, had made her believe that what they shared was special. She couldn't walk away now, not when she had already come so far. And so, the distance grew. Between Lakeisha and her father, between Shoop and his wife, between who they were and who they had become. The cracks were small, but they were there, waiting, widening, threatening to shatter everything the moment the truth came to light. Secrets have a way of unraveling at the worst possible moment. What begins quietly, hidden in the corners of stolen time, can grow into something that demands to be seen, no matter how carefully it's concealed. And for Shoop and Lakeisha, the moment they feared, the moment they never thought would arrive, was finally here. Lakeisha, trusting and oblivious, took a sip, then another, the wine flowing easily as the conversation continued. It didn't take long for the drug to take effect. Lakeisha's eyelids grew heavy, her words slurring as she tried to keep up with the conversation. A wave of confusion washed over her, and she looked at Shoop with a frown, as if trying to make sense of the sudden exhaustion that had overtaken her. "I don't feel so good," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Shoop reached out, his hand resting on hers in a gesture of false comfort. "It's okay," he said softly. "You just need to rest. Everything's going to be fine." Lakeisha's body grew limp, her head lolling to the side as the drug pulled her into unconsciousness. Shoop watched her for a moment, ensuring that the drug had done its job. Then, without a trace of hesitation, he moved to the next phase of his plan. He carried her to his truck, her unconscious form cradled in his arms like a dark echo of the day he had carried her as a baby. But this time, there was no joy, no pride, only cold determination. Shoop drove in silence, the road stretching out before him like a path toward freedom. He had chosen the location carefully, a remote area deep in the woods, far from any trail or road. It was a place no one would stumble upon by accident, a place where secrets could stay buried. The drive was long, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him with every mile. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The moment he had crossed the line, there was no turning back. There was only one way forward now, and he was committed to seeing it through. When he reached the clearing, he stepped out of the truck and looked around, ensuring that they were alone. The forest was silent, the trees standing like mute witnesses to what was about to happen. Shoop opened the door and lifted Lakeisha from the passenger seat, her body still limp and unresponsive. He carried her deep into the woods, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. And then, in that remote, forgotten place, he did what he had convinced himself he had to do. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling only slightly as he placed them over her mouth and nose. Lakeisha stirred briefly, her body reacting instinctively, but the drug had taken too strong a hold. Within moments, the struggle stopped, and the forest fell silent once more. Shoop sat there for a moment, his hands still pressed against her lifeless face, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and then, as if on autopilot, he began to dig. He worked quickly, the dirt flying beneath his hands as he created a shallow grave. Time blurred, the weight of his actions settling like a stone in his chest. But he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. When the grave was finished, he laid Lakeisha's body inside, covering her with the cold, damp earth. And just like that, she was gone, buried beneath the weight of lies and betrayal. Shoop stood over the grave, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The night was still, the forest holding its breath, as if waiting to see what he would do next. But there was nothing left to do. He had made his choice, and now there was only silence. Without a word, Shoop turned and made his way back to the truck, leaving no trace of what had transpired. The forest would keep his secret, and with it, the life he had been so desperate to protect. But some secrets refuse to stay buried. When someone goes missing in a close-knit town, it sends shockwaves through every corner of the community. People rally together, neighbors exchange worried glances, and families cling tighter to each other, hoping it never happens to them. But this time, the missing person wasn't just anyone. This was Lakeisha Ellis, the daughter of a beloved officer, a girl everyone knew and adored. The day Lakeisha didn't come home, panic began to spread. Her parents, Carrega and Denise Ellis, went from thinking she was running late to realizing something was very, very wrong. They tried her phone. No answer. They called her friends. None of them had seen her. And when the hours ticked by, with no sign of Lakeisha, fear set in like a cold wave crashing over them. Carrega knew something was off. His gut twisted with a father's instinct, that nagging feeling he couldn't shake. Lakeisha wasn't the type to vanish without a word, without letting someone know where she was. And as the sun set on that first day without her, Carrega did the only thing he could. He called in a missing persons report. The sheriff's office sprang into action, or so it looked. Leading the search was none other than Shoop Marshall, the man who had every reason to make sure Lakeisha was never found. Shoop wore the mask of professionalism perfectly, his voice steady, his demeanor calm as he promised the community that he would do everything in his power to bring Lakeisha home. But every step Shoop took was calculated, every lead followed, every search organized was done with one goal in mind: to keep the truth buried, along with Lakeisha. The search started immediately, with deputies canvassing the town, questioning anyone who might have seen her. Shoop ensured that every effort looked genuine, teams scouring parks, abandoned buildings, and back roads. He was there every step of the way, barking orders, comforting volunteers, and appearing to go above and beyond. To everyone else, he looked like a man determined to find the missing girl. But in reality, Shoop was always 2 steps ahead, steering the investigation away from the one place they'd never look: the remote spot where Lakeisha's body lay hidden beneath the cold earth. Carrega, desperate for answers, leaned heavily on Shoop, his longtime friend and mentor. Then, without a trace of hesitation, he moved to the next phase of his plan. He carried her to his truck, her unconscious form cradled in his arms like a dark echo of the day he had carried her as a baby. But this time, there was no joy, no pride, only cold determination. Shoop drove in silence, the road stretching out before him like a path toward freedom. He had chosen the location carefully, a remote area deep in the woods, far from any trail or road. It was a place no one would stumble upon by accident, a place where secrets could stay buried. The drive was long, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him with every mile. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The moment he had crossed the line, there was no turning back. There was only one way forward now, and he was committed to seeing it through. When he reached the clearing, he stepped out of the truck and looked around, ensuring that they were alone. The forest was silent, the trees standing like mute witnesses to what was about to happen. Shoop opened the door and lifted Lancashire from the passenger seat, her body still limp and unresponsive. He carried her deep into the woods, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. And then, in that remote, forgotten place, he did what he had convinced himself he had to do. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling only slightly as he placed them over her mouth and nose. Lancashire stirred briefly, her body reacting instinctively, but the drug had taken too strong a hold. Within moments the struggle stopped, and the forest fell silent once more. Shoop sat there for a moment, his hands still pressed against her lifeless face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. And then, as if on autopilot, he began to dig. He worked quickly, the dirt flying beneath his hands as he created a shallow grave. Time blurred, the weight of his actions settling like a stone in his chest. But he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. When the grave was finished, he laid Lakeisha's body inside, covering her with the cold, damp earth. And just like that she was gone, buried beneath the weight of lies and betrayal. Shoop stood over the grave, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The night was still, the forest holding its breath, as if waiting to see what he would do next. But there was nothing left to do. He had made his choice, and now there was only silence. Without a word, Shoop turned and made his way back to the truck, leaving no trace of what had transpired. The forest would keep his secret, and with it, the life he had been so desperate to protect. But some secrets refuse to stay buried. When someone goes missing in a close-knit town, it sends shockwaves through every corner of the community. People rally together, neighbors exchange worried glances, and families cling tighter to each other, hoping it never happens to them. But this time, the missing person wasn't just anyone. This was Lakeisha Ellis, the daughter of a beloved officer, a girl everyone knew and adored. The day Lakeisha didn't come home, panic began to spread. Her parents, Carrega and Denise Ellis, went from thinking she was running late to realizing something was very, very wrong. They tried her phone, no answer. They called her friends. None of them had seen her. And when the hours ticked by with no sign of Lakeisha, fear set in like a cold wave crashing over them. Carrega knew something was off, his gut twisted with a father's instinct, that nagging feeling he couldn't shake. Lakeisha wasn't the type to vanish without a word, without letting someone know where she was. And as the sun set on that first day without her, Carrega did the only thing he could. He called in a missing persons report. The sheriff's office sprang into action, or so it looked. Leading the search was none other than Shoop Marshall, the man who had every reason to make sure Lakeisha was never found. Shoop wore the mask of professionalism perfectly, his voice steady, his demeanor calm, as he promised the community that he would do everything in his power to bring Lakeisha home. But every step Shoop took was calculated, every lead followed, every search organized, was done with one goal in mind: to keep the truth buried, along with Lakeisha. The search started immediately, with deputies canvassing the town, questioning anyone who might have seen her. Shoop ensured that every effort looked genuine, teams scouring parks, abandoned buildings, and back roads. He was there every step of the way, barking orders, comforting volunteers, and appearing to go above and beyond. To everyone else, he looked like a man determined to find the missing girl. But in reality, Shoop was always 2 steps ahead, steering the investigation away from the one place they'd never look, the remote spot where Lakeisha's body lay hidden beneath the cold earth. Carrega, desperate for answers, leaned heavily on Shoop, his longtime friend and mentor. Shoop played the part well, offering words of comfort and support, his arms slung around Carrega's shoulders as they combed through the possibilities. "We'll find her, Carrega," he said more than once, his voice steady and reassuring. "I promise you, we'll bring her home." Each time Carrega's hope wavered, Shoop was there to catch him, He stayed close to the family, visiting their home often, sitting at their kitchen table and holding Denise's hand while she wept. He became their lifeline in the chaos, the one person they felt they could rely on when everything else was falling apart. And that was exactly how Shoop wanted it. But Shoop's grip on the investigation was tight. He carefully controlled the narrative, guiding deputies and volunteers toward false leads. He suggested that Lakisha might have left town on her own, perhaps overwhelmed by the pressures of school and life. He floated the idea that she might be staying with a friend who hadn't come forward yet, or even that she might have been picked up by someone she knew. His theories planted seeds of doubt, redirecting the search toward meaningless trails that led nowhere. Shoop knew how to manipulate the emotions of those around him, playing the role of the concerned sheriff while subtly pushing the investigation further from the truth. Every time the search teams got close to an area he feared they might uncover, Shoop conveniently found a new lead, a sighting that needed to be checked out on the other side of town, a tip that required immediate attention elsewhere. He kept everyone moving, always one step behind where they needed to be, ensuring that no one ever came close to the grave where Lakisha's body rested. Meanwhile, Lakisha's parents clung to every word Shoop said, believing that he was doing everything in his power to find their daughter. Karega especially relied on Shoop more than anyone else. As a father and an officer, Karega felt helpless in the face of his daughter's disappearance. But with Shoop leading the charge, he felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that if anyone could bring Lakisha back, it was the man he had trusted for so many years. Words that could ease the pain of such a loss. Every dream Denise had for her daughter's future was gone, wiped away in the cruelest way. Lakisha's pregnancy spread quickly, turning an already horrific crime into something even more unthinkable. Shoop Marshall wasn't just a murderer, he was a predator who had exploited his position of power, manipulated a young girl, and taken 2 lives to cover his tracks. The man who had once been the community's protector now stood as a symbol of everything they despised. Protesters gathered outside the sheriff's office and the courthouse, their voices echoing through the streets. Signs demanding justice for Lakisha and her baby waved in the air, and the calls for Shoop's conviction grew louder by the day. The community, once proud of its sheriff, now viewed him as a monster in uniform. Every kind gesture, every award he had received, felt like a mockery of the evil he had hidden beneath his badge. In the Marshall household, the revelations were equally devastating. Sharon Marshall sat in stunned silence as the news unfolded, her world collapsing under the weight of her husband's lies. She had been blindsided by the affair, shattered by the murder, but the pregnancy, that was the final blow, the one truth she couldn't comprehend. She thought back to every moment she had shared with Shoop, every day he had spent with their daughters, knowing now that he had carried this unspeakable secret the entire time. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the knowledge that her husband had fathered a child with Lakisha, a girl they had watched grow up, a friend to their own daughter. The sheer cruelty of it left her speechless. Tiffany Marshall, Shoop's youngest daughter and Lakisha's best friend, was broken by the news. She had spent weeks mourning Lakisha, trying to understand how her father could be involved in such a crime, but learning about the pregnancy was too much to bear. Lakisha had been carrying her half-sibling, and now both were gone, taken by the man she once called Dad. It was a betrayal so profound that Tiffany didn't know how to process it. She retreated into herself, shutting out the world. She refused to speak to her father, wouldn't even acknowledge his existence. The idea of him disgusted her. Every memory they had shared, the moments she once cherished, were now tainted by the knowledge of what he had done. She felt as though her entire life had been built on lies, and the weight of that realization crushed her. Harper, Shoop's older daughter, responded with anger. She had always been closer to her father, had looked up to him as a role model, only to discover that he had committed unspeakable acts against someone she had grown up with. The pregnancy was the final straw. Harper packed her things and left the house, cutting all ties with her father, unable to forgive him for the lives he had destroyed. The Marshall home, once filled with laughter and routine, became a silent war zone. Sharon tried to hold her daughters together, but there was no repairing the damage Shoop had done. Their family was broken beyond repair, fractured by the weight of his betrayal. And in the quiet moments, when the world felt still, Sharon sat alone, grappling with the reality that the man she had loved for decades was capable of such monstrous acts. The community's anger burned hotter with every passing day. Lakeisha had been one of their own, bright, ambitious, and full of potential. And now both she and her unborn child were gone, victims of a man they had once trusted. The demand for justice was relentless. They wanted to see Shoop punished, not just for Lakeisha's death, but for the life of the child she carried. They wanted to ensure that he could never hurt anyone again. Carrega and Denise found some solace in the community's support, but it was a cold comfort. The loss of their daughter and grandchild left a void that could never be filled. They attended every court hearing, sitting in the front row, determined to see Shoop face the full weight of justice. But even a conviction wouldn't bring Lakeisha back. Even seeing Shoop in handcuffs wouldn't heal the wounds left behind. The tragedy that began with Shoop's manipulation had grown into something far larger. A story of betrayal, loss, and broken trust. The community would never forget what had happened, and neither would the families involved. The name Shoop Marshall would forever be associated with pain, with loss, with the lives he had destroyed to protect his own secrets. And as the trial loomed, the town prepared itself for the final chapter, a reckoning long overdue, for Lakeisha, for her child, and for everyone whose lives had been shattered by the man they once called Sheriff. The trial of Shoop Marshall gripped the community and the nation, drawing everyone into the dark story of betrayal, manipulation, and murder. Reporters packed the courtroom, cameras perched outside like vultures, ready to capture every moment of the sheriff's downfall. It was not just a trial, it was a reckoning, one that demanded every ugly truth be laid bare for the world to see. From the outset, the prosecution wasted no time laying out their case, presenting a narrative of manipulation that revealed Shoop's true nature, a man who had exploited his authority and preyed on someone who trusted him. Every move he made was calculated, they argued, from the start of the affair to the cold-blooded murder that followed. Shoop Marshall, they said, was not the man the community had thought he was. He was a man who used his badge as a shield to hide his darkest impulses. Piece by piece, the prosecutors reconstructed the events leading up to Lakeisha's death, using surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic evidence to paint a damning picture. They exposed Shoop's efforts to manipulate Lakeisha, convincing her to meet with him under the pretext of mentorship. They explained how he lured her to a remote location, drugged her, and ultimately killed her to protect his reputation and career. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutors described Shoop's actions. Every word felt like a hammer, striking the very foundations of trust. Each piece of evidence served as a reminder of the man Shoop had pretended to be, and the monster he had become beneath the surface. Then came the emotional testimonies, and with them, the heart of the trial was laid bare. Lakeisha's parents, Carrega and Denise Ellis, were the first to take the stand. There was no disguising the grief etched into their faces, nor the weight of the pain they carried as they spoke about the daughter they had lost. Carrega's voice cracked as he recalled the first day Shoop had joined their search for Lakeisha, standing beside him as a trusted friend. "He looked me in the eye," Carrega said, struggling to hold back tears. "He told me we'd find her. And the whole time, he knew exactly where she was." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands, the weight of the betrayal too much to bear. Denise's testimony was equally devastating. She spoke about the dreams Lakeisha had for her future, the plans she had shared late at night over cups of tea. She wanted to make a difference, Denise whispered, her voice trembling. She wanted to work for the detectives, to protect people. And instead, the man we trusted, our friend, stole her future and buried it in the ground. Her words hung in the air, suffused with the sorrow of a mother who would never see her daughter grow into the woman she was meant to become. As the trial continued, the courtroom was filled with a palpable tension. Every testimony, every exhibit presented brought the harsh truth into sharper focus. But the most shocking testimony came from Shoup's own family. Sharon Marshall, his wife, took the stand with a heavy heart, her voice steady but filled with disbelief. "I don't know who my husband is anymore," she admitted. "The man I married, the father of my children, wasn't capable of this. Or at least, I thought he wasn't." She spoke about the months of lies, the late nights when Shoup returned home with excuses that now felt like insults. "I believed him," she said quietly. "I believed every word. And now I have to live with the fact that I was married to a man I never really knew." Her words landed with the weight of 1,000 betrayals, a wife forced to confront the darkest truth about the man she had shared her life with. Tiffany Marshall, Shoup's youngest daughter, gave perhaps the most painful testimony of the trial. As she sat in the witness chair, tears streaming down her face, she spoke about the friendship she had shared with Lakeisha and the devastation she felt when the truth came to light. "She was my best friend," Tiffany said, her voice trembling. "She was like a sister to me. And my father took her away from me." The room fell into silence as Ella's grief poured out, unfiltered and raw. The prosecution pressed further, painting a picture of a man who had not only betrayed his badge, but destroyed 2 families in the process. They described the lengths Shoup went to in order to maintain control. His manipulation of Lakeisha, the lies he told his family, the web of deceit he spun around everyone who trusted him. Finally, it was Shoup's turn to face questioning. The room was still as he took the stand, the weight of his actions pressing down on him from all sides. He had denied the affair at first, denied everything, clinging to the hope that he could somehow escape the consequences. But as the evidence stacked up, it became clear that there was no escape. Under the relentless questioning of the prosecutor, Shoup's defenses began to crumble. His mask of calm authority slipped away, revealing the man beneath, a man consumed by fear, regret, and guilt. At first, his answers were short, clipped, as he tried to maintain control. But as the prosecutor pushed harder, his composure broke. The prosecutor leaned in, voice steady. "Sheriff Marshall, did you or did you not have an affair with Lakeisha Ellis?" Shoup's silence was deafening. "And did you not lure her to that secluded area the night of her death?" I. His voice cracked, and for the first time in the trial the truth began to surface. "And did you not end her life, Sheriff Marshall?" "Served, but the loss remained a haunting reminder of the lives stolen too soon and the trust that could never be restored." Even after the trial ended and Shoup Marshall was locked away, the pain he caused lingered like a shadow over the community. There were no easy answers, no quick resolutions. Lakeisha's death was not just a tragedy, it was a reckoning that forced everyone to confront the reality of betrayal hidden behind power and trust. In the wake of such devastation, healing was slow and uneven, but it had to begin somewhere. For Karega and Denise Ellis, the loss of their daughter was a wound that would never fully heal. There were days when the grief felt unbearable, when the silence left behind by Lakeisha's absence was too loud to ignore. But they refused to let her memory be defined solely by tragedy. Determined to create something meaningful from their pain, they founded the Lakeisha Ellis Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping young women who had suffered abuse at the hands of those in power. The foundation became a beacon of hope, providing legal aid, counseling, and mentorship for survivors of abuse. What started as a local initiative quickly grew, attracting national attention. The Ellis family traveled the country, speaking at schools and community centers, determined to prevent other families from experiencing the same nightmare they had endured. For Correga and Denise, the foundation was a way to honor their daughter's memory and protect others from the dangers she faced. But healing took many forms, and not all of it was visible to the public. Sharon Marshall and her daughters, Tiffany and Harper, quietly packed their lives into boxes and left town, hoping to escape the scandal that had consumed their family. The weight of Shoup's betrayal was too great to bear in the community they once called home. Every street, every face, was a reminder of what had been lost. Sharon chose a new town far away from the headlines, a place where she and her daughters could start over. For Tiffany and Harper, moving away offered a chance at healing, but it also meant confronting the reality of who their father was. It would be years before they could fully process what had happened, before they could separate their memories of the man they loved from the monster he became. Their journey toward healing would be long and complicated, but it was a step they were ready to take together. Back in town, the community struggled to rebuild. Trust, once freely given, became harder to come by. The sheriff's office underwent a complete overhaul, with new leadership determined to restore the public's faith. Policies were rewritten, safeguards put in place, and mandatory training on ethics and accountability became standard practice. The town knew it would take more than just new policies to rebuild trust, but they were willing to try. Local schools and community groups partnered with the Ellis Foundation to create programs aimed at educating young people about the dangers of manipulation and abuse of power. It became a part of the town's identity, a lesson learned the hard way, but one they were determined not to forget. Lakeisha's story was shared openly, not as a scar, but as a reminder of the importance of speaking up, of holding those in power accountable. There were still moments of anger, of frustration. The wound Shoup left behind would take years to heal, and some would never fully recover. But slowly, bit by bit, the community found ways to move forward. They knew that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering and learning, about becoming stronger and wiser through the pain. Even as the town began to rebuild, a question lingered, one that haunted every family, every officer, every person who had followed the case. How do we protect ourselves from those sworn to protect us? Shoup Marshall had worn a badge, had sworn an oath to serve and protect, and yet he had used that badge to manipulate, to betray, and to destroy. His story was not just one of personal failure. It was a warning, a reminder that power in the wrong hands is a dangerous thing. The question now was not just about justice for Lakeisha. It was about preventing the next betrayal before it could happen. But this story is not the only one of its kind. There are others. Other abuses of power, other betrayals hidden behind authority, waiting to be uncovered. Stories of manipulation, exploitation, and control that demand to be told. Stories that remind us why accountability matters and why we must never stop questioning those who hold power. And so we leave you with this question. What would you do if the person meant to protect you became the one you feared most? How do we guard against those who hide behind trust and authority? There are more stories to tell, more truths waiting to be revealed. Join us for the next chapter, where we uncover another shocking case of abuse of power, one that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Please subscribe and stay with us as we continue to expose the stories that demand justice and accountability, because the only way to prevent betrayal is to shine a light on the dark corners where it hides. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning.